Don Carmen Coleman says a demon was just casted out at Asbury University Revival. Ooh, that is not good at all.
The Pentecost revival doesn't look at all like what is happening at Asbury.
2 seconds later.
Unfortunately, we're starting to see some bizarre behavior at the revival. Demons being cast out, speaking in tongues. Let's hope this isn't the beginning of more, well, wacky NAR-like behavior.
So, Craig, you have released a video where you respond to criticism of the revival, and I plan to include that in the show notes because you do a very good job, I think, to respond to various sorts of criticisms. But one common criticism that I would like you to also discuss here is a criticism that has been raised, especially among some quite influential Christian YouTubers whose videos have had hundreds of thousands of views. And that criticism has been there isn't enough preaching, especially not preaching about sin, about repentance.
I would say one of the bad things about the Asbury Revival is that I when I was there, I did not hear a gospel presentation.
Asbury University, it is a part of what is known as the Wesleyan Holiness Movement. Now, Wesleyans and Methodist brothers and sisters are Orthodox believers, but this particular branch does not usually preach very forcefully on sin, judgment, wrath, and the need for repentance. And the presence of those ideas, it's kind of necessary for actual revival to take place. And those who visited Asbury, like Spencer Smith, Elisa Childers, they observed they didn't hear the gospel proclaimed once. Now, even if it has been preached occasionally, the centerpiece of a true revival is the gospel.
What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts on that are that people should stop complaining and join up with what God is doing, but it's up to them. My wife, who was praying for people, so she was like in the front of the auditorium and a different auditorium. She was in some of the overflow spaces at different times too, but she was like in the front lines most of the time. I was there some of the time where I could hear what was going on. People did preach repentance, and people did preach the gospel. And so people are saying that they didn't based on the clips that they listened to. I mean, it's like saying, okay, well, based on this, we think, in this sample group, everybody was white. And so, hey, it must be only white people. It started with the Black Gospel Choir, so just based on sample size, you can't make sweeping statements. And I don't know if some of the critics are taking it from other critics or whatever. It's just simply not true. There was preaching about that. Now, the majority of the time was spent worshiping, which I believe also was true during the Welsh revival, where there was a lot of singing of
definitely
songs over and over. I talked with Michael McClymond about this, who's a revival historian at St. Louis University, and he was comparing, different revivals in history, and definitely saw this as an outpouring revival in terms of some of the ones that he could compare it with. But yeah, people have their idea of it has to be this template, and then they want to impose that on everything, and they don't recognize in the book of Acts there were different outpourings that were expressed in different ways, although most of them did include worship. And this, in fact, it was because of the sense of God's holiness and awesomeness that there was this focus on worship. It wasn't just to get together to sing songs for 360 hours straight. It was the presence of God that was leading to that. A lot of the criticisms I dealt with in the video, I probably didn't need to deal with all of them because some of them I'd only heard like once or twice, and I think they weren't that dominant. But yeah, this is one I've heard more since then, and it's like, where were you? I mean, just because you didn't hear it doesn't mean it didn't happen. We were there. We did hear it.
Yeah, and I also thought it was interesting that one of these quite influential videos that questioned the revival. It wasn't a direct criticism or labeling it heresy, but it raised some questions. And one of this YouTuber's points was that it doesn't look like the revival in Acts. It doesn't look like Pentecost. And then his next point was it included some bizarre phenomenon like speaking in tongues and casting out demons, which really confused me. I understand that these are people coming from the cessationist perspective. And actually, we hardly have any cessationists here in Sweden. We have some
That's
liberal
good.
theologians who question the existence of miracles altogether, both in biblical times and today. But basically, there is no distinguished or difference between evangelicals and charismatics in Sweden. We're basically one huge group. But still, I thought it was very confusing that even a cessationist would not hear himself first saying, this doesn't look like Pentecost, and it included speaking in tongues. That's bizarre.
Yeah, we did. So far as I know, there was no rushing mighty wind. Well, there were some weather phenomena outside, but and there was there were no tongues of fire on top of people. In terms of the speaking in tongues, again, it's like Sweden. I mean, Asbury is not anti-charismatic, so even though it wasn't traditionally like, it didn't start as part of the charismatic movement. It goes back earlier than that. I mean, nobody's really opposed to it. And so, yeah, there were people from all sorts of different denominations there worshiping God in our own ways. And I think most of the tongue speaking, though, was under people's breath. I mean, people were being respectful of the wider ethos, you know, just worshiping God together in unity. Or as Michael McClymond put it, in homothumadon, using the language of Acts 1:14, where they were all together with one mind, one spirit. So, as he put it, people who'd never met before and would never meet again in this life, being of one mind. But even when you say, okay, well, it has to be like Pentecost as the template, you look at other points in the book of Acts where the Spirit was poured out with different expressions. And so people need to not put God in the box. Let God be God. It's all right to say, okay, well, this is not like this, but is there something wrong with worshiping God? Is there something wrong with acknowledging God's holiness? Is there something wrong with calling people to consecrate themselves wholly to God? If those things are biblical, let's stop complaining and embrace what God has for us. Okay, so it's not exactly what you were looking for. It's all right. It's still something good. And yeah, there were critics of every outpouring of the Spirit, you know, whether you were talking about major, you know, awakenings, or we're talking about smaller outpour, you know, whatever we're talking about, there have always been critics, including in the day of Pentecost. You guys are drunk.
Exactly. I totally agree with you.